Let's move on. With less than 2 weeks to go on Brexit, the leaders of France and Germany have been making positive noises about the chances of a deal with the UK before the deadline is reached. But of course, that's the deadline of the 31st of October we're talking about. Before then, on Saturday, which is the 19th of October, there's another deadline imposed on Boris Johnson by his own parliament, designed to force him into begging for an extension from the EU if a deal hasn't been reached. I tell you, it's almost a full-time job trying to follow the twists and turns of Brexit. But as I've said all along here on Credlin, if you believe in democracy, the idea that the people can vote to leave and the establishment then get away with frustrating the people's will, well, it should be something we all reject. So where are we up to tonight? Let's bring in someone who is no stranger to Boris Johnson's leadership style and how this all might be playing out internally because, in fact, he used to work for him. And it's one of our Credlin regulars, LNP Senator for Queensland, James McGrath. Great to have you on the show, James. I'm going to have a Brexit discussion in just a moment, but I've got to ask you, do you think today's announcement is enough, or does more need to be done to assist farmers facing drought?
I speak as someone who lives in a drought-declared area. I live on the Southern Downs, just outside of Warwick. I live in David Littleproud's electorate of Maranoa, which is 42% of Queensland, and I think 100% of his seat is drought-declared. And I think David knows, has been listening to people, and I've been listening to people. Look, we'd always like to do more. I'd always like to do more. I'd like to just get people more money to help them. I think it's a good thing what the government has done today. They've been listening to people. They've been listening to your colleague Alan Jones about trying to get more money to the farmers. But the only thing that's going to help them really, and I speak of the dairy farmer down the road from me who's paying an outrageous amount of money for hay to feed his herd. I don't know how he's making any money. The only thing that's going to stop this is rain. But what we're missing out here, and this sounds really boring, is the governments at a state level for decades haven't built dams. And in your opening statement, you talked about what New South Wales has been doing. That is brilliant. You know, Minister Pavey should be made the Australian of the Year for what she's doing in terms of water infrastructure in New South Wales. My state government here in Queensland have done nothing. They've been in power for 25 out of the last 30 years, and there's a dam in Queensland called the Paradise Dam that Keith Pitt knows very well, and Ken O'Dowd. They're actually reducing the size of it. This is how crazy Queensland is. But the federal government would love to do more things, but we've got to build these dams and stop talking about it.
I agree with you. I agree with you, James. James, I worked for your side of politics in opposition. We put together a plan for 100 dams. Took it to the election in 2013. I'd be buggered to see if any one of those 100 dams have even had a shovel in the ground. So I get the talk and I get that people have had enough. I know in Victoria, reports today, the CSIRO has not done a feasibility study, not one, on any dam in Victoria for a decade or more. So Victoria is in trouble. We know Queensland's in trouble. There are reports today that farmers in South Australia are being compensated when they cover in their dams, when they fill in their dams, God forbid, not when they build dams, but when they cover in, and I'll follow that one up as well. But I agree with you on all of these things. But my question is, a lot of hoopla about this announcement today, and I rang the Minister's office, I got the detail myself. We're not talking about 30,000 people, as some of the headlines said. We're talking about 500 only people that you're about to cut off farm household assistance because they've been on it for 4 years. They'll be cut off anyway, but they'll get a kiss-off payment of $13,000. Now, 500 people, $13,000. As I said, that's a rounding error in the Commonwealth budget. Yeah. Can't we do better? Can't we do better?
Well, the government did a review, as you mentioned earlier, into it, and a lot of the bodies like the NFF and AgForce and mob like that, it landed at 4 years. We listened to those bodies out there in terms of where the cut-off should be. In an ideal world, you'd like to be able to give farmers. I would, as a son of a farm and the grandson.
We don't cut the dole off. We don't cut the dole off.
Yeah, it's a good
as long
point.
as people keep applying for jobs.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll leave it here because I know what side.
Yeah.
I know what side of the debate you're on in most of this stuff, so I'm putting you under pressure. But I know people at home are pretty cranky about it. Unemployment rate, some good news today, 5.2%. So that's a continued fall So well done to the coalition. That puts, I think, some pressure back on the RBA, not necessarily to cut, because people are now saying that continued cuts are hurting confidence and hurting superannuants and other savers. Where do you go to now on the back of the IMF's downgrade of growth forecasts yesterday? This point today, the 5.2% in unemployment numbers, the fall, that really amplifies, I think, the point the Prime Minister was making, that you've got the settings right. Around the world there is concern, sure, but in Australia we're on the right track. Is that fair enough?
That's fair enough. Yeah, there are worldwide issues happening at the moment. The IMF said there's going to be a general slowing, but Australia's economy is still going to be growing faster than every G7 economy apart from the US. And I know I shouldn't be too political, but just imagine what would have happened if Labor had won on May 18 and they were in power, in terms of what they'd be doing to the economy and how they'd be mishandling it at the moment. We do have the settings, I think, broadly right, and we've got a long-term plan to cut taxes. We need stability now. We need people just to... We've got political stability, we need economic stability, and that's what we've got at the moment with the government.
OK, you've been a former party chief in a number of states and territories before. Interestingly today, Kayla Murnane, the Labor General Secretary, or former Labor General Secretary in New South Wales, the one that's been fronting ICAC, formally resigned. She's been stood aside for some time, but she formally tendered her resignation today. Now, it wasn't the fact that she knew about dodgy deals and didn't say anything, or coughed up information about the receipt of cash in Aldi bags. One of the reasons she claims today that she went under a bus is sexism inside the ALP. I'll put a statement up there on the screen, but she said, "I believe it is unarguable." Well, that's a tautology there, because anything can be argued, but she says it's unarguable that our party has never fully grappled with the nasty culture of sexism which women face in politics. "I'm devastated to leave. I am sorry I've let you down." Isn't it more bad practice than her gender that's got her into trouble?
She's been drinking from the well that Labor Party politicians in New South Wales, including Anthony Albanese, who was part of the Labor Party machine and a former Assistant Secretary of that Labor Party machine, have been drinking from that rotten, corrupt well that is the New South Wales Labor Party, the whatever it takes culture. No one should have any sympathy for her. You know what is right and what is wrong, and I speak as a former person who's worked for the party. You respect your party members. You respect the values of your party members. In Queensland, I had people like Bruce McIver and Gary Spence who represented the party, and they weren't factional henchmen. They were people who got up there and said, this is the right way of doing things. To claim sexism, I mean, I'm going to be blunt, what a sook. And she needs to look into her own soul in terms of her own practice. But the New South Wales Labor Party is corrupt to the core, and the current leader of the federal Labor Party is someone who's been a part of that machine for decades. And on Sunday, he suddenly goes, "Oh, we need to have intervention here." Oh, come on! I'm calling bingo on him in relation to his conduct there. He has been part of the problem, and he's now leading federal Labor. So good luck, Labor.
Yeah, and it's interestingly, both the leader in New South Wales and Anthony Albanese both said that, look, we want to have this inquiry, we're going to get to the bottom of the cultural issues in the New South Wales Labor division, and from there we'll then go and find ourselves a new chief that meets the new way forward. But of course, over the weekend, the factions met and they have decided who the new leader is, and be buggered for the results of the review. They're going to name that leader anyway and install that leader. And this shows you that the politicians that lead the Labor Party in New South Wales and indeed in Canberra have no real say, and it's the backroom bobber boys, the factional warlords of Labor and Sussex Street, that will call the shots anyway. I want to move on to another issue quickly before we get into Brexit. No, we might go to Brexit. I want to play two grabs for you, James. One's from Donald Tusk in relation to the status of the negotiations between the EU and the UK, and also President Macron. And there's a little bit of hope in here, I think. Let's listen.
The main framework of the agreement is ready, and theoretically we could accept this agreement tomorrow to avoid the chaos and misery associated with the chaotic exit of Great Britain.
On Brexit, I want to believe that a deal is being finalised and that we will be able to sign off on it tomorrow.
All right, there's a difficult deadline for Boris Johnson on Saturday on the 19th. It's the parliamentary handcuffs, if I can call it that, or his own parliament. have bound him to beg for a deal if he can't get a deal by then. And then, of course, there's the absolute deadline of the 31st of October. How do you think things are going to play out?
I think he's going to get the deal. If you look at the news that's coming out of the UK, and I've actually spoken to a couple of my mates over there who are MPs, I haven't spoken to Boris, and they think a deal's going to happen. And I think when we wake up in the morning tomorrow, that we should wake up to news the deal has been arranged. There's such positive news coming out of the EU in terms of the negotiations that have been taking place, but also out of London and out of Westminster in particular, what you call the ERG group are quite confident that a deal can be done that they're happy with, and they're the strong Brexiteers, for those who don't want to get trip up in acronym soup. They're quite happy with the terms of what they understand the deal to be. This is going to be seismic for Boris if he gets this deal through, because as important as getting this deal is and listening to the people, which is the most important part that any politician can do, he has to stop Jeremy Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister. He has to stop that guy who wants to nationalise schools and nationalise the railways again from becoming Prime Minister. He gets that deal through, it means that the Parliament can then, because Labor have been calling for an election, can then actually go to an election, and you can see Boris get over the line with his own mandate. But it is all to play for at the moment. It is changing by the hour. So watch Sky News all night, but also get out your phone and look at websites in the UK and see what's going on there.
Look, you're right. The very staunch Brexiteers have moved a long way, I think, to accommodate Johnson. They've been out publicly supporting him, backing him in. So I think they know that the real issue here is Corbyn, not so much Brexit anymore. Just before we go, how quickly do you think it will be, if he gets the deal, that we'll see a general election?
I reckon you could see one before Christmas, actually, because he will get such a wave of support. And the thing is, British politics has been messy for the last few months, or the last few years, but the Tories are ahead in the polls. He gets this deal through, and Parliament votes for this deal. The people are going to be so happy they're not talking about Brexit anymore and go back to focusing on the NHS, focusing on schools, focusing on congestion, real issues. Boris will be seen as that miracle maker. He goes to election focusing on anything else but Brexit. You can see him getting a solid mandate from the people. You can see an election before Christmas.
James McGrath, as always, thanks for your time tonight.